Before we get into kind of the content and the meat, I wanted to also make sure everyone was aware that we have a question through the app of how you participate and interact with end-of-study media today. So if you can, go into your app, go into this session, and once you find the session, if you click on the session, you'll be able to navigate to the panel question. And as we go through this, we will read back the answers and the responses that we get. And as we do that, could you get a show of hands, who here interacts with end-of-study media on a regular basis? Terrific. And how many of those people have cell phones and have digitized most of their life? Why in the world do we still have CDs that we ship around to all our sites and have to think about getting signatures, wet signatures that come in via FedEx? I feel very fortunate to have a great panel up here to speak about end-of-study media and the challenges that they have experienced, both from a regulatory perspective, Ari, as well as Charles. We had a little bit of an intro. Why don't we quickly just, if you guys can introduce yourselves and give a little bit more background and color, that'd be great.
Sure. I'm Charles. I've been with CSL now for going on 2.5 years. I've been engaging in metadata systems for the last 15 years. But I've had varying positions starting from normal data analysts through to the position that I have now. I think one of the things that's really innovative about CSL is their look at technology and innovation and how we engage with our sites and patients. So partnering with Medidata obviously has been a very fruitful thing for us, especially for our sites. So we're consistently looking at platforms and other pieces of technology that not just help us drive clinical trials, but help us engage better with our patients.
Thanks, Charles. Ari?
Good afternoon. My name is Ari Feldman, and I lead Medidata's global compliance and strategy practice. So everything that deals with product and quality and regulatory kind of comes my way. And I have the pleasure of working closely with Perry and the extended product team to kind of solve this issue around end-of-study media. I also had the distinct pleasure of shortly after joining Medidata, meeting some of the European regulators because they were interested in looking at Medidata's practices. And so as education goes, I got that education very quickly and have some practical insights and experience to share.
So as we get into this, I want to take a step back and talk about the end-of-study media solution via RCM that we have today, and then I'll throw it over to Ari for a quick question regarding the challenges that we have with CDs. But really what we've done is taken our regulatory content management system, which is just a housing area for end of study or for all documents that get created on the Medidata platform. And you could think of any document that gets created from a monitoring visit letter report to a payment CTA as a document. All that is going to be started to be housed in the regulatory content management application within Medidata. And what we've done over the past year is actually put that content capability directly into our end-of-study media process. So now going forward, and we have a big release that we've come out with, and now we're live, and that is the end-of-study media content created on Rave will directly feed into our content management system, and that will then be digitally invited, the sites, your sites, to receive their end-of-study media in a digital fashion. Therefore, anything that you do from a digital perspective, all the activities get tracked. Therefore, all the reporting, it does not have to go through FedEx or DHL. All the reporting and everything can go directly through the RCM application, not only to the sites, but also to the sponsors and CROs. So we're live with this, and we're really excited about it, which is one of the reasons why we had invited Charles from CSL to come speak, because they're live with it now in production. To start off from a questions perspective, what was the challenges, Charles, that you saw from the old process, and what was your thought process to starting with end-of-study media via RCM?
So most people who deal with end-of-study media, they're very familiar with the fact that we send the media, we get a piece of paper back saying that media was received, and then we literally have no idea what happens to it at the site. we get a lot of re-requests, not just at CSL, but at other places that I've worked around, an inspector has come in, I don't have my CD, I need data again, and then you're back through the whole process of trying to cut them a new CD. So essentially some of what's happening is these things kind of get tossed in the drawer, passwords get lost, things like that. So that's kind of the normal thing that happens. Any kind of natural disaster or anything like that, I've had that happen a few times in the past as well, where there's, we had sites in Louisiana, for instance, that were flooded and completely lost, all of their archives. So how do we get media back to them? And it's the only thing we had was to recut CDs. Some of the other challenges that we had seen are just computers. If you have a recent laptop, it probably did not come with a CD or DVD drive. So sites have been consistently asking us for whether or not we can put them on the information on a thumb drive or something like that. We have a policy at CSL where we're starting to try to move away from putting anything that could be potentially confidential onto a thumb drive. Yes, there's encryption there, but if you've been involved in computers or you've used the thumb drive before, they're very easy to take apart, and some of the encryption that comes inherently on a thumb drive is relatively easy to get around once you've done that. So how can we do this in a secure way? How can we do this in a way where we have some traceability, we can track what's going on, it's audit trailed, we know who received what. And then of course some of the QA implication as well, where recently we've been trying to figure out how we get around some of the more recent findings where sponsors are no longer allowed to review or QC site media. It has to go directly from vendor to site. So how do we do that in a controlled way where we can show that we have some control over it, leveraging permissions within a system? So that's essentially the reason why we chose to kind of take a closer look at what you guys were doing with RCM.
Terrific. And then from a regulatory perspective, Ari, so you've been here for a few years now. You've had a bunch of interactions with customers, sponsors, CROs, and the regulators. How do you see the biggest challenges that existed in the previous world?
Sure. I think it's no secret that sites retaining access to their data is probably the biggest issue around, aside from some of the physical issues in terms of moving the CDs and creating and generating and testing them. Site retention of access to their data is probably one of the top priorities on regulators' minds. And so, when you have your study lock and all is good, you cut off access, the concern is that, well, now from the time that you've cut off access to the time that you generated the study media, that there isn't site control of their data. And so with a combination of technologies, so if you're taking, let's say, Rave EDC, using iMedidata, we can continue to have site access to the data all the way to the time that data is actually migrated into the RCM platform. So the issue of site access kind of goes away and solves that big regulatory concern.
I think that the regulatory concern is on the top of my mind as I speak to a lot of customers, because they've, in some cases, have actually had findings where regulators have come in and started to poke holes at their own process, the CD process, working with the CROs as well as their own processes also is an area of contention. And when you take a straight-through process from Rave EDC directly into end-of-study media via RCM, and then also add in the complexity of layering in any multimedia that might come after the process happens, any archiving that is necessary. A recent customer actually came to me and said that one of their challenges was that a regulator asked to see extremely old documents. It was 10-year-old documents that they couldn't get access to. Charles, have you been in a situation where this time shifting caused you challenges?
For sure. So a lot of times where, it's one of the things that we get stuck with is not having the ability to have kind of like that immediate representation of the data that we collected. So we can do it kind of through reports and things like that, but it is resource and time consuming. I think it's a little bit worse for sites probably. Once they do lose access to EDC, similarly to what Ari was saying, they end up in a situation where they're kind of stuck in limbo, and now they're relying on this one piece of media that they have available to them to be able to kind of meet an auditor's need. So I do think that from a quality perspective, trying to find an electronic or a relatively quickly reproducible way to visualize their data back to them it's key. And it's long overdue.
Yeah, if I might add, it doesn't, so end-of-study media on it electronically solves the problem of physical, how do I get access to it? And we all know that when someone comes knocking on your door, whether it's the FDA, the EMA, the MHRA, the PMDA, whoever it might be, from a regulatory perspective, I think blood pressures kind of go up instantly. And there's this sort of urgent need, I need this data now. And if we can solve that problem relatively quickly with this electronic format. The other thing that you can solve is many sites don't really understand how to read the data. So they'll get the data, they'll say the inspector asked for XYZ audit trail. They want every piece of activity that happened between this day and this date, and then you dump the audit trails and there's 2 million lines of data because, and then we get feedback. It's quite interesting. We get this feedback of you're taking too much data, and then we get these feedback of you need to gather more data. But at the end of the day, what happens is during a regulatory inspection, when the question is being asked very pointed, there isn't really an understanding of that data. And by having access, what we can do as a provider is work with you directly and with the site and with whoever's going through the inspection, whether it's an internal audit, from within the company or external regulator, we work directly with you to say, hey, tell us what problem you're trying to solve, and we get the people on the phone who understand the data, understand the reports. We don't have to worry about how do we get the data to someone, because we can provision access on the fly.
I think you bring up a really good point regarding sites and site satisfaction, both from a sponsor and a CRO perspective. One of the things that I hear when I talk to customers across many different pieces of our portfolio is becoming a site of choice or a sponsor of choice, being working closely with your sites to be able to deliver a study, a protocol, research that drives value. And being that sponsor of choice, being that CRO of choice, I think is rising higher and higher on sponsor and CRO's list. Charles, maybe you could talk about some of the drivers and motivations. I think you've touched on it a little bit, but I think it'd be really good to hear some of the business drivers that you were going for as CSL made that transition.
Yeah, so again, one of the focuses of our company is, like you mentioned, to be a sponsor of choice. And I think from an engagement perspective with our sites, this particular item has been kind of a little bit of a thorn for them, especially for us where we have a lot of site reusability because we are in a rare disease space. So we do have a lot of re-engagement with sites. And the process for end of study media for them was becoming relatively cumbersome. So we had tried to do some things kind of within the process to kind of smooth some things out for them and to make kind of like that return receipt and things like that a little bit easier. But we were still delivering just the same media. And I think it goes to some of what you were saying where trying to pull out one specific piece of information off of a CD that they received and kind of pouring through things and not necessarily having them cataloged for themselves was still a little bit difficult for them. So just the navigation of like the media itself and remembering a password and things like that had become cumbersome. So we really, again, in the scope of being sponsor of choice, we wanted to kind of find a new solution for them where they always have constant access to RAVE for us anyway because of the way that we run our clinical trials. So it made sense for us to kind of look to a platform solution rather than bringing in something new to help us catalog this. Like We had thought about Dropbox and some of these other things as potential solutions for these. But again, that would have been another large-scale validation that we would have to go through with our IT team and things like that. And there were some quality management concerns and things like that. So going with the platform that we already knew, we already had vetted, was an ideal situation for us. So just some of the feedback that we've received from the sites, having gone through this process, it's been a resounding success from the site perspective. The process is really, really easy. They're already in the system. It's just an additional module, and it's very easy for them to just navigate to their media. So we've gotten a lot of great feedback from sites.
That's terrific to hear. What percentage, prior to this, what percentage of times did you receive positive confirmation that the site received the CD?
So when we receive confirmation, because typically that takes quite a bit of time. Again, the process is a bit cumbersome, and we ended up using like CRA resource to try to like force the return receipt to come back and things like that. They get a little irritated and annoyed with us for consistently reaching out to try to chase them down to confirm that they've received the media. So there's, I wouldn't say it's been their biggest concern, but when they're kind of ready for the study to be done and move on to the next one, it's a little bit of a nuisance for them to have to consistently engage with us on something that they don't seem to think is that important.
Can I just add something here? So just to clarify, the solution that we're using is regulated content management, or RCM. It's a fully validated package. So Charles did allude to the fact that it's already being used. We use it, I know Medidata uses it internally for all of our quality management system documents. Many of our clients use it for their electronic, their e-binders and the like. So sites are already familiar. One of the reason why I raise that is because one of the concerns that the regulators raised is the constant introduction of, and this is quite interesting on the backdrop of some of the keynotes we heard this morning, some of the regulators are concerned with the increase in technology at sites will cause more confusion. It's more to learn. I understand that, but somehow or another, I would venture to say that many or most, if not all, the people at the sites have phones that and they've kind of figured out how to adopt, as whether it's Android has advanced their technology or Apple has advanced their technology. I think it's only fair to say that in the space of clinical trials, there might be some pushback in there, but it's natural for this progression to take place. It's a validated piece of software that provides what is necessary, and it either meets or exceeds existing regulatory requirements globally, frankly. And I, at the risk of stepping on Perry's toes, I mean, if there's any questions from the audience as we're speaking, please raise your hands. We'll be happy to take those questions.
So by a show of hands, who here believes the amount of return receipts they get back is below 50%? Below 50%, wow. What about below 60 to 50%? 70 to 60%? Okay. What about 70 to 60%? So that means everyone else is above 80%? Look, having spoken to a lot of customers, I typically hear somewhere between 60 to 65% is generally kind of what they expect. Charles, in terms of your interaction with your sites, how has that changed?
Yeah, so it was 100% for the two trials that we've used RCM on so far. It's been 100%, and it's 100% with the first communication. It hasn't required a whole lot of follow-up. There's been no CRA intervention. They receive a message that it's available. There is a message for them actually within the system that tells them that it's available, and they pick up their media and confirm.
So one thing as we think about this solution that Charles had brought up, and I just wanted to kind of reiterate and kind of tie in some of the things that Charles talked about and some of the things that Ari had mentioned, is this is really, when we started this discovery process and working with our RCM customers and sponsors, CROs like Charles, this was technology that was already validated. The RCM product we were already using internally, we were already selling as an eTMF, and this became almost a natural extension. And it's something that we had discussed with regulators about leveraging this capability to solve this industry challenge. And one of the first conversations that I've had was, well, why can't you use Box or Dropbox? And once we started getting into it with some customers and even talking to Box about this, the whole regulation piece comes into it, and that's not something just to easily wash away. And I think that that's why some sponsors and some CROs have tried to leverage these existing technology and typically back away. And when you look at what we have out there today and customers starting to use, already validated systems and capabilities, leveraging the digital signatures across the board brings down the barrier of entry for sites to take advantage of this stuff. To see a 60, 65, 70% kind of acceptance rate jump up to 100%, to know and have that site satisfaction, it really drives and motivates the sponsors and CROs that we speak with. Any questions about the solution or about some of the challenges that you might have? One of the things also, if there are questions that we couldn't answer, some of your peers might be able to address that question as well. Any recommendations for sponsors or CROs out there?
So I think the big thing for us was the training. So it is a relatively new approach for not just us as sponsors, but also for Medidata. We did develop our own e-learning for RCM, very specific to this. So I know that there's training available for like how to navigate through the system and things like that. But we tried to do something that was a little bit more specific to end-of-study media. So we did produce something ourselves. We did consult with Medidata in the production of that training. But I would say you really have to focus in on the training, because it is a little bit of a paradigm shift for them. They've been used to receiving the CD for the longest time, and now this is a bit of a switch for them. But I do think that what we did put together as a training together did help with kind of like moving through the navigation. It was one of the survey questions that we did ask these sites was, how did the training feel to them and things like that. So I do think that you have to pay close attention to that. So RCM is just another iMetadata module. So you would just essentially, when you log into iMetadata, if you have multiple modules, then you kind of know the setup down the left-hand side. RCM just pops up as another module. If you have something outstanding, there's an indicator there letting you know that there's something waiting. You essentially click it to go into that module. I think right now there's still, is there an additional login? Or is it still through? So when you go in through iMetadata, it kind of, like the content manager is kind of right there in front of you, and then it kind of runs you through your tasks.
So there's two big components. One is one you still need to print the reports from Rave, and then it automatically flows into your end-of-study media module within RCM. Then that data, then the automation process, the digital process takes root. It sends out the invitations, if you will, to the sites, and then they can log in. But your data then is already structured directly for that site and for that site. And then for you as a sponsor, you have your own place with all of the data that you're able to see. Correct. Entirely. And then there's an archiving process that the data then is available for the length of that contract. So that's the first part. The second part is, depending on what else you're doing on that study, you might have RTSM data. That if you're using RTSM, metadata's rave RTSM, then that's there. But you might be using a different RTSM, or you might be using a different imaging system, or you might be having other data that you would then be able to import into the end of study media capabilities, modules that you have access to. So you're able to better deal with the time fluctuations that are more difficult on a CD.
So the studies that we've done so far, I think the first one we did was a 10-site study. I think there were in the neighborhood of 50 patients or so, but we wanted to do something small first. The second study that we're still working through is, I think there's 75 sites and somewhere in the neighborhood of 250 patients. So we've kind of gone through the proof of concept with the first smaller study, and then we're now working with a larger study. As far as quantifying kind of the return, that's some of the conversation that we're going through now with Medidata. Given that we've done this kind of as a pilot, there hasn't really been any financial discussion, so that really hasn't changed. But as far as quantifying resource and effort, it's really easy. I have one resource in my team who essentially puts in the same request that you would normally put in for an archive, and that request goes in, and then we get response saying that the archive is available. It's still taking the normal time right now. I think that there's still some things probably internally at Medidata that they're still working through. So you're still looking at, well, it was a little bit shorter. It was around 3 weeks where they came back to us and told us that the archive was available. So I think that they're looking to kind of like improve the internal piece of the process as they get a little bit more used to providing the service.
So do they always maintain access to the RTM, or is it the opposite that they then have to download that media or content and save it however they save it?
Yeah, so that's actually a great question, and that's still part of the process that we're still working through a little bit internally. So we do have a bunch of flagship sites for us that we know they'll just maintain access, forever. But some of the sites that we haven't kind of historically gone back to and things like that, we've been thinking about, like, once they've kind of done some level of a confirmation that they've downloaded, their particular media, going ahead and then removing their access. But we would always have that available. So if they ever did come back to us and needed to re-request, it would just be the matter of us granting them the access again to do the download.
So it's a really good question. It's something that we debated internally. And where we're netting out is for an end of study media process, it will always be there for a year. And then if you want to archive it and keep it around for the 15, 25-year regulatory requirement, then that would be kind of a separate discussion from a product perspective. But those are really the two flavors in terms of archiving it forever or just providing it to your sites to be able to download it and retain individually.
There's a question there.
Yeah, so there's the end of study media process as it exists today, as Charles was mentioning. You talk to your project manager, and they fill out a project closeout requirement document, and that goes into the customer service, and then all of a sudden it shows up in your end of study media via RCM module. So it's a very similar process that you run today in that upfront process. But then it completely is automated and digital on the back end. Rather than receiving a CD, you receive an email, you'd be able to log in, and there it is.
Yeah, so let me add, from a quality management perspective, there's no change to the quality management system in that the requirement documents are still the same, right? There's still a request, there's still a sign-off. What there is, which doesn't warrant an update to the quality management system so much as there is now this kind of benefit of audit trails. So you can tell when it was added to the system, who downloaded it, who has access to it. So there's that guesswork that comes out of it of, well, you didn't get confirmation back from the site, you call the site, you don't know who signed for it, that person's now gone, right? So there's just all those kind of things that kind of go away. And I would say that, my background, as was stated in the introduction, is all around risk and controls and governance. And Medidata has this huge initiative for the last few years around controls and around this transparency and audit trails. We're happy to host audits. We're happy to, give all that information. But what we've done is we've moved that to a real-time process. So, you don't need to come and ask us for the audit trails during an audit. We give those to you. We make those available to you. So in terms of, let's say, access, it's not like you need to wait. If someone needs to do some sort of review, we can grant that access. You can review the audit trails, et cetera. So, to your point, it's the process is the same. The quality management system, if nothing else, is strengthened.
Thank you all for coming. We'll be up here if you have any specific questions that you want to talk to us about the process, talk to Charles about his experience in a more intimate setting outside of this huge room with lots of chairs. I appreciate you guys coming. Actually, and to close out, if you could come up and...
Yeah, sorry, there's a few housekeeping items I supposed to at the beginning, but so be sure to visit the Innovation Lab after this presentation to learn more about the product being showcased in this session and throughout the conference. And remember to fill out the survey about this breakout on your next app at the end to help us continue to improve our contents for future events.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.